Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our softball preseason webinar. My name is John Skees, and I'm the Director of Media for TAPS. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, but first I've got a few housekeeping items I want to cover. So first and foremost, this webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email with a link to that recording as soon as it's ready. That should be later this afternoon. Second, if you have questions, please use the questions feature in the GoToWebinar interface. That side panel on the side of your screen, you're going to see a drop down that says questions. You can type them in there and we will see them. We're going to try to answer those as we go through the presentation, but if we don't get to your questions, there's a brief Q&A kind of at the end, so don't worry if we don't get to it right away. But if your question is too specific to answer appropriately in this venue and we don't get to it, please send us an email, info@taps.biz, or call us at the office. Okay. I'm joined today by Brian Bunselmeyer, the TAPS Executive Director, Robert Huckabee, TAPS Associate Director and Director of Compliance, and Steve Prudhomme, TAPS Associate Director. I'm connecting remotely, but Will Dixon on the TAPS staff is in the conference room today helping us out. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian.
Just want to say welcome and thank you for joining us here today for the softball webinars. We do our preseason information, try to get what you need out to you today. We gave 2020 a good shot. We had a good plan to continue, but the pandemic continued to rise, and I don't really think it stopped yet. However, I think our protocols are better, and I think we're better prepared to handle the situation as we move forward. So we thank all of you that were with us last year and gave it a valiant effort. And also, we appreciate everybody that's joining us today to make 2021 one of the best seasons ever. So without much more ado, TAPS will have our dates, our rules, our plans are pretty much the same as they have been in the past before COVID interrupted us. We do have a few protocols that we'll go through, and we'll talk about our emphasis for the coming year. Steve, tell us about the dates for this coming season.
Well, the dates are Monday. We get started with practice, and we're all excited about that. And again, probably more excited than we've been in years to begin our softball season this year. Make sure that you check all the important dates and you're abiding by the calendar. First scrimmages will be January 25th, followed by first games on February 1st, April 27th. We've gone through a great year. We'll certify the district at that point. And moving on, we will have certification. The playoffs will begin on the 29th and the championships the 12th to the 15th. And after a great season, we'll have a May 19th all-state selection meeting, which will be in Belmead this year. But we're excited to get started with the year. And Robert's going to tell us a little bit about the rules.
All right, Steve, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to bounce through in this webinar some of the rules. Just hit the highlights. If you have questions, always reach out to our office. We can assist you with that. The TAPS rules for softball are found in sections 174 through 176 of the TAPS bylaws. In a few minutes, we'll jump over to the website, show you how to find those and navigate those. But just so you know, that's where those are found in the bylaws. One of the most important rules with regard to our interscholastic competition is games. That's scrimmages, tournaments, and games, game limits. How many games you can play in a season. Softball is one of those sports that has a beginning and an ending to its season. Those are found in section 174. Those remain in place and have not changed. You're allowed 22 games and 3 tournaments total. That's the maximum. TAPS will be allowing tournaments this year. That's certainly up to you and your school administration as to whether you go and participate in tournaments that might be available, or if you choose to host tournaments yourself at your school, that's something that will be up to your local school administration following your protocols and whether you believe that's the best decision for your school, given your program in your particular location and what's going on in your neighborhood. There are no games per day or week restrictions. We leave that up to you. Obviously, there is a practical limit as to how much you can schedule and play, but we leave that up to local control. And then as you move into the playoffs, warm-up games are allowed per round. That is still allowed. Warm-up games are allowed per round. Those do not count against your maximums. Your maximums apply during the season through district certification. So keep that in mind as you plan your schedules throughout the season. Brian, talk a little bit about schedules and eligible opponents.
Before we jump to the opponents, let's continue on that schedules talk, Robert. As a reminder, you are allowed up to 4 scrimmages, and you can have a scrimmage after play begins. Is that correct, Robert?
That is correct. And you can swap games for tournaments, and that formula is there contained in 174. We had that question earlier in our baseball webinar, and you can still swap games for tournaments. That formula is in there. If you have any questions, reach out to us. We can help you with that.
So it's in the bylaws. It's there. We're here to help. Info, INFO at taps.biz, or give us a call at the TAPS phone number. We still have that Salado number, 254-947-9268, or info, INFO at taps.biz if you have questions. So moving on to eligible opponents. Section 138 is which outlines who an eligible opponent is. You must be playing high school teams. You are not allowed to play teams comprised of student athletes from multiple schools. Each of our metropolitan areas have school teams that have students from different schools. A lot of them are, I got cut from a high school team, or my school didn't have a team, so we created it. You are not allowed to play junior high teams. That question has come up. And are you allowed to scrimmage or play against college varsity or sub-varsity teams? And the answer would be no. We are a high school-based organization. As we move down, the next one, homeschool teams must be comprised totally and wholly of homeschool students. Again, they're not allowed to have a homeschool team that takes students who are actually attending a brick and mortar school or attending another school other than a homeschool group. Teams must generally follow the TAPS basic eligibility guidelines. That means they are high school students. They are not more than 19 before September 1, and they haven't been in high school more than 4 years. So whose job is that to make sure we jump out and ask? That's your job to ask. If you schedule a home team, you need to tell them these are the TAPS basic eligibility guidelines, and we anticipate that you'll follow those and not play your 19 and 20-year-olds against us when we go play. And the homeschool groups either are recognized in an approved league or they are in one of the homeschool qualifying tournaments. So just because they're a homeschool group or just because they are a charter school doesn't necessarily make them eligible to play against TAPS schools. Affiliated leagues, or if they're affiliated with the league, of course, many of us play the UIL. A lot of you play the SPC, the Southwestern Preparatory Conference, and TCAS schools. Those are the leagues right off the top that are approved. The schools are a member of those that you can reach out and play those for your non-district contest. Not allowed. You're not allowed to play schools who have left teams that are not in good standing. Unfortunately, every now and then we have a school and we have a difference of opinion and they choose to leave TAPS and move to another league, and that is perfectly fine. Everybody has the ability to choose with whom they wish to associate. But when you leave under sanction or when you leave not in good standing, then you're no longer an eligible opponent for our schools. We do have a couple of those in each of the metropolitan areas. If you have questions, reach out to the TAPS office. We'll be glad to discuss those with you. Club teams, select teams are not eligible as opponents, so don't go look out and say, hey, I need a game, especially in this COVID time. I'll get the Stingrays 86 or whatever and try to go play them. That's not going to be an eligible opponent. Independent teams. Independent teams are teams that are not affiliated with a league or an association. There are several charter schools and there are several independent folks that fall into that realm, so please don't schedule those teams as well. And then schools that are members of a non-approved league. There is a league out of San Antonio. For those of you in that area that know them, they have schools up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area as well. Those schools are not allowed as members to be played against. So Steve, once we know who we can play in state, what happens when we have schools from out of state, even during these COVID times?
Yes, and it can be okay to play an out of state opponent, but what you're going to need to do is fill out an out of state form and see about getting them approved and sanctioned by the TAPS office. If they're not sanctioned, then you're not able to play them. You'll be in violation. So whether you're going out of state to play or whether an out of state opponent's coming in to play you or you're making them part of your tournament, you need to fill out a form. And the rule of thumb is if they're part of a NFHS approved association, then we can work through it and get it approved. If not, then they'll have some issues and we'll let you know what their standing is. So make sure that you ask the question. Now, if you get into a tournament in state and there's an out-of-state opponent on the other side, or you come through the bracket, then that's not going to be your responsibility. We're not going to hold you to having to pull out of a tournament for that. But again, if it's something that you're responsible for, you're hosting, you need to make sure that you do that form and you go into your Rank 1 account, go to the coach's toolkit, and you'll find the form right there, and he'll come to our office and we'll be able to help you through that.
So that applies whether you're on the eastern side of Texas and you're trying to go into Louisiana or Arkansas. It applies if you're going across into Oklahoma or New Mexico as well. So those are games that either you host or you're taking your team to. So if it's your tournament, make sure any out-of-state team is approved prior to competition. This is not a, hey, I'm telling TAPS we're going to do this. I'm asking permission to do this. And failure to get out-of-state opponents approved could result in game limitations being assessed to your school next year.
That's very true. And also, and Robert and I deal with most of them, but we don't like to get the phone call and say, okay, I need this approved and I need it in 2 hours. That's not going to go over very well. So make sure that you plan. Moving on, something more basic, what it's all about. It's the ball, and the required ball of TAPS is Wilson. We do the A9011 as our official ball. This is the ball that's to be used in all games hosted by TAPS schools. So whether you're home or you're having your tournament, if you're in charge of the ball, it needs to be a Wilson. We'll use these all the way through the playoffs, and then we'll be providing those at the championship Final Four. So again, make sure that you have the proper ball, and also let us know if you have any difficulty finding where you can buy the ball from, or you need dealers, because we can reach out to the Wilson leadership and find the best thing for you there as well. So again, we're supportive of that, but also that is required. Moving on to game information. This is required. This is necessary. That we know exactly what games are going on. Again, it's our oversight. We're establishing the eligibility from the TAPS office and for all member schools. And also your opponents, the people in your district. It's important that you keep up with all this information. So the first thing that needs to go in is the schedule. So make sure that the schedule is properly put into rank 1 and turn it to public. Many times we get people panicking, they can't figure it out, and that solves about 80% of the problems if they'll just switch from private to public. And again, you can still make changes to your schedule inside of rank 1. Same said for ScoreStream. If you get your schedule into there, and Will in our office is our expert on score reporting, but make sure that you report all your score information in rank 1 and in ScoreStream. Score reporting again is required. So we give you one big slide to make sure that that's understood. And once you update in rank 1, it goes directly into the standings, the district standings, and we're able to keep up with that. And then as we get to the end of the year, it's important to know as we get our matchups, our certification. So again, stay on top and make sure that you're being professional, you're being thorough. And again, this is very important. Now, ScoreStream is something that you can give to someone else to do, your manager, your parents. That's kind of the beauty of ScoreStream. That's that in-game update that we can get, and it runs the ticker that goes across our web page. It's also good. You can give that to that parent that's overly exuberant, maybe, and they need something to do. Make them your ScoreStream person. So again, stay on top of the score reporting. It makes it fun, and also there's a lot of fans keeping their eyes on what we're doing, and they want to follow you. Moving on to officials. We had a wonderful call last night, Zoom call with the TASO board for softball, and again, they're so enthusiastic about getting back to softball this year. They just couldn't even contain themselves, so they're ready to come out and work. We need these guys as you move forward. The TASO and the TAPS approved chapters are crucial for us to make sure that we're able to get the games played. And it's required that you look at section 134, also that you go to your resources, look at the officials page, find out who's approved by TAPS, who is not. We also have some contact information. And at the bottom it says TASO, but you can say TASO/TAPS approved chapter trained, which again, they're responsible for the training. They're a member in good standing, and they are assigned by the chapter that we've approved. So this is not about walking in there with a patch on your sleeve saying, hey, look, I got a TASO patch. I'm ready to go. And me and 3 other guys, we just go and call games. No, it needs to go through the chapters, through the organization. And that's important for all sorts of reasons, insurance, also for oversight, and it helps us when things happen. Also, when we're dealing with the officials, they do incident reports, and hopefully we get good incident reports. But also if there's an ejection or there's something that happens or there's an appeal, because we don't allow the appeals, but if there's a questionable thing, TAPS office is here to help, to work through it, and to stand behind you. Also, the pay scale, the recommended pay scale is in in the officials pages. And see, we want to make sure that you follow that. Also, please get a contract with your chapter. Make sure that you understand what's going to be charged, how you're going to do it. Make sure the schedule is into the officials, especially this year. These umpires, again, they're going to be all over the place with COVID. Make sure the schedule's in, changes are communicated, and work with each other. And there might be a time, due to the number of umpires that we have available, that they might ask you, could you move that game from a Friday to a Thursday, or from a Monday to a Tuesday? And again, you have a little bit more flexibility than the UIL schools do, and we can make that happen. So again, work with them, and again, communicate with them, and we're here to help that process as we move forward. So again, the officials are very, very important.
All right, Steve, thank you very much. We're going to jump over to our other set of rules. Our playing rules are determined by the NFHS, the National Federation of High School Association. Those are our rules and regulations for softball. Those can be found at nfhs.org. You need a copy of that rule book with you at all times. I know a lot of you have the little hard copy you might throw in your bag or throw in your notebook and take with you. What we use here in the office, and we highly recommend, those are available on your phone. NFHS has an app. You can purchase that rule book. It'll be a download on your phone. We use them here in the TAPS office for all of our sports, all of the things that we go to. So we have a copy handy anytime we need it. We know everybody's going to have a phone with them everywhere they go in today's world. So consider that. It's about the same cost as the book. I think it's about $10 or so for that download. It's very affordable, and it is good to have that. Sometimes you might have a rules question. You might have a question come up during a game or in your pregame meeting with the officials. It's good to have that actual rule there where you can all look at it together and make sure everybody's on the same page. So consider having that with you at all times, and it can be available on your phone. Briefly, just going to jump through some highlights of some NFHS changes last year that were points of emphasis. Unfortunately, we didn't get to finish last year, so some of these may not have come into play very much, or you may have forgotten them. Just going to jump through, as you can see on that next slide. The first one is about making sure your bats have the appropriate certification mark. Not going to read through all that. You can read that yourself. You can look those up, but that is a requirement. All your bats need the appropriate certification mark. Make sure that's true. Bats are always a big deal in baseball and softball. They've changed a lot over the years. So keep up with what's allowed, what's not, and make sure you have all the appropriate certifications in place. The next one's inspection of equipment. It is the head coach's responsibility to make sure all of your equipment is legal and proper. It is not the official's responsibility, although they may inspect things from time to time if something arises. It is the head coach's responsibility. So make sure you keep that up and keep it maintained as you go throughout the season. Here's a reminder about the penalty for use of a damaged bat versus an illegal bat. That is separate. An illegal bat obviously carries a higher consequence than a bat that might be damaged during play, and that description and distinction is made there. And then contact with the pitcher's plate, how you place your feet, where you place them, the couple of different ways that you do that. That is there and described. So make sure you're familiar with that. On all these things, if there are new rules or new points of emphasis, be sure in your conference with the umpire at the beginning of the game, be sure to mention these or ask questions if you have any, to make sure as you begin the game, everybody's on the same page and understand what the rule actually says, and if there is an interpretation, how that particular crew is going to approach that. Now we look at the TAPS rules. Those are found in our bylaws in sections 174 through 176. So if we'll just right quick jump over to the TAPS website, we're going to show you real quick where to find those. If you're familiar with them, that's great. If not, this is the main TAPS website, taps.biz. Right there where Will is hovering over resources, if you drop down 3 or 4 items, you'll see bylaws. If you click on that and give it a few seconds to load, it will take you over to a big Google Doc that has our Constitution and all of our bylaws. And you can see on the left, that table of contents popped up there. Just scroll down to 174, Will. If you go to 174 through 176, those are the softball specific rules right in there, 174 through 176. You click on that and it'll take you directly to those particular sections, and you can scroll through that and find any information you need. Another little trick when you're in this document, if you're familiar with Google Docs, you can hit Control F, and that is a search button, and you can type in a keyword and it'll take you to all those keywords that are found in that document, and that is a little help. In softball or in any other rules you might be looking for in TAPS, you can use that, and that is very helpful. Will, if we'll bounce back to that main web page just for a second. If we go back to the main TAPS website, you can see right there over to the left by TAPS is athletics. If you want to go to the softball page, click on athletics, scroll down. Of course, that's a spring sport, so that'll be listed under spring. You can click on softball, and all the latest information will be there. You can see, you can get to the standings there, brackets, all kinds of things. And then right there where it says softball blog, those are our latest updates and blogs that we send out specifically related to softball. So if you have questions about information, and of course, as we move through the season, all of our championship information will be there as well. And right there in the middle, you see score stream right there. Those are our schools or other schools that are playing, and that will be streaming all the time. As Steve mentioned, score reporting is required, and all your people can get access to it right here on ScoreStream. That scores we get later in the day, not today, but once we start playing games, we get on a game day. There's a lot of scores in there. They're scrolling through frequently, and so that is a good resource there for latest updates on scores. All right, Will, thank you very much. Let's jump back to our webinar. Next, let's talk about eligibility. All of our coaches, all of our staff, and all of our athletes need to be eligible in Rank 1. Rank 1 is our database. You're probably familiar with that by now. Hopefully you are. We've been doing it for a couple of years. All of your staff needs to be in Rank 1. So all of your coaches, that's head coaches, assistant coaches, and as Steve always likes to remind us, you may have multiple roles at your school. You may be a head coach in one sport, an assistant coach, a sponsor for robotics, or any number of things that you could wear different hats at your school. Please make sure all those roles are marked correctly in Rank 1. We send out our communication. Steve's going to visit with us about that in a minute, through Rank 1. And if you're not listed in there in that particular activity, you won't get those emails. You won't get that information. So make sure that each coach has a profile completed. They have all their pertinent information, and they have gone through and completed all of their scope and their acknowledgement of rules. Same is true for students. All your students need to be in the Rank 1 database. Their profile is in there. If they're a new student, their parents went in there and set up their profile and answered those questions and completed that information. If they were a returning high school student, then they update those each year. That's where they sign their acknowledgement of rules. They fill out their medical information. If they happen to be a transfer student or something that requires other documentation, all those forms are available for them there in Rank 1 as well. And then finally, you may have some school-based forms that are a requirement that you have of your students. It might be a permission form, it might be a travel form of some sort. Those are all in there as well. If you've included those as a part of your Rank 1 requirements, then all that information is in there. And once that student selects a particular activity and you put them in a particular place, then all those forms that are required are automatically populated by Rank 1. If we look at eligibility of high school students new to school, obviously that includes your transfer students. That includes your students that matriculated from the 8th grade into the 9th grade. They're now new students in high school, so they need to be in Rank 1 as well. And if you had any international students, they have additional paperwork required as well. Brian?
Just to clarify, Robert, and just kind of reiterate what you said, this is all high school students that are participating in softball need to be shown in Rank 1 as participating in softball. And all coaches that are working with the high school players, regardless of whether they're one day a week coming in as a hitting coach, whether they're a head coach or assistant coach, all your coaches need to go through the Rank 1 system to make sure they get scope certified. Just want to make sure we didn't overlook, if they're in high school, they're a coach or a student, and they're working with the softball program, then they must have that approved prior to the first game, which would be February the 1st. So you still got a couple of weeks to get yourself through and get caught up if you want to be ahead of the curve.
That's correct. And the last thing you need to do is you need to create that softball roster. So what you'll do is you'll go and create your team. That would be softball in this case. You will build your roster. You'll pull your students over in softball over into that roster. And as you pull them over, they will automatically show up as either red or green. If they're red, that means rank 1 has identified some form that is required that is missing or has not been completed, not been uploaded. If they are green, that means all those forms are in there and they should be good to go. Remember, softball is one of those sports that does require a physical, so they'll need that medical history in rank 1. The parents complete that online as they do their profile each year. They can answer all those medical questions online, and that is an online submission. They can also take that physical portion that goes to the doctor. They can get that completed, and then at your level at the school, you upload all of that information into rank 1. Medical history and physicals have been a requirement in TAPS for many years. We're still requiring it this year, even with COVID. I think everybody's navigated that okay and been able to update those. At the beginning of the year, we know it was a challenge, and we told people you could use the most recent one until they could get to their doctor and get a new one completed. So make sure all that's done. That information is stored in rank 1. We need to know it's there. That's a part of the red-green process. We do not have access to medical information. We don't want access to that. We just need verification that it is in the system. So you manage that and you upload that at the school level and assist us in that. Let's move on to communication. Steve?
Yeah, and going into communication, rank 1's a great form of communication because it lets you know through colors, red or green. It helps you to catch those things. So again, as you go around to the various people on your campus, keeping up with the students can be tough. So hopefully, if you'll put everything into rank 1, it'll watch out for us and make sure that our communication in that aspect is okay. Moving on to our other forms of communication is the website, and you got to see that just a moment ago, where you go to athletics and then to the softball page, and the softball blog is right there with the latest post, and it gets you there very quickly. Also, emails will be going out. We pull these email addresses from rank 1. So again, emphasize what Robert said. Make sure that you check off that you're a softball coach, because if you're football and you don't check softball, you won't get the softball email. So make sure they're all done and make sure they're all accurate. We have the ability, and at times we'll use push notifications through rank 1. And also we use Twitter at TAPS softball. So there's at TAPS and there's also at TAPS softball. So make sure that you follow us on Twitter and keep up with all the communications that are going on. It is key. It is key. As you move down, Will, we went to the website. We showed you that. We went down to the softball page, which is very important. And again, if you have any questions, you call us here at the office or email us at info@taps.biz. Sometimes people call us, I'm so sorry to bother you, I got a question. I say, no, that's what we do for a living, is we answer the questions, we help. That's our job. So make sure if you need something that you reach out to us. Okay, Robert, I hand it back to you for health and safety protocols.
All right, Steve, we had a question. I think we covered it, but we'll hit it right quick. Do you require JV players to be listed in rank 1? The answer to that is yes. All high school players need to be listed. Think of your rank 1 softball roster as an eligibility roster for all of your students, whether you have a varsity, a JV, whatever. If we get to a point, you're fortunate enough to advance through the playoffs, move into the Final Four and the championship games. We'll help you walk through creating an actual program roster of only your varsity students, only the ones that would maybe show up in that Final Four format. But for eligibility purposes, yes, all of your students playing softball, whether they're on a freshman JV or a varsity team, need to be listed in rank 1 and need to be green and good to go before they enter into competition. Let's jump into health and safety. Obviously, COVID-19 has been at the top of everyone's list this year with regard to health and safety protocols. We know everybody had to create protocols that they did not think or envision would ever be necessary. We've had to do that at our level, hosting our events. One of the most important things as you think about protocols required for softball is how you communicate with your opponents. So communication is very, very important for all of your pregame communication. This is required for all contests hosted by a TAPS member school. So if you're hosting a game, you're required to communicate with your opponent. That's scrimmages, games, tournaments included. Let's jump to that pregame communication, Will, and look at that page right quick. So for every game you play, varsity and sub-varsity, both teams are affirming to the other team that all your participants are symptom-free on the day of the contest. They're in compliance with COVID, self-screening, contact guidelines, and this includes the coaches, players, managers, trainers, anyone associated with the team. If you are the home team, you're responsible not only to affirm those things to your opponent, but you're also securing the officials. So you're responsible to make sure the officials and both teams know that everybody is good to go. The officials, obviously the home team will work with them, and they have their protocols and things that they are following that are unique to their particular association as well. What is that pregame affirmation? Well, it's very simply a self-screening process where all the players, all the coaches on the day of the game, that's anybody associated with your team, you are confirming at a minimum that you do not have the symptoms, you do not have COVID, nor have you been in recent close contact with somebody who does. So that's what you're affirming, so that everybody playing the games every day knows that we're good to go and our opponent is good to go as well. How will those health and safety protocols affect the world of softball? Well, there are some things specific to softball that will come into play. How will it impact my program? Well, first off, it's going to affect potentially your practice time and limitations and protocols, and those are up to your school. Those are local control in keeping with your local, state, and any national rules that might be out there that would regulate what you do and how you do it, how you practice, the things you have in place. Of course, we've had our protocols in place since the beginning of the year, our general protocols with regard to your school being required to have its own protocols for sanitation, for cleaning areas, the playing areas, the bench areas, those kinds of things. Those have been required all year, and those will remain in place. For your contest, rules that apply to your contest obviously apply to all scrimmages, games, and tournaments. Your tournaments, if you choose to host a tournament, then you would need to be following those protocols as well. For your pregame protocols, let's talk about the playing area. Those will be in keeping with your school protocols for sanitation, social distancing, those kinds of things. Your bench area should be obviously cleaned and maintained and socially distanced as best you can, cleaned and disinfected on a regular basis. Follow your school-based protocols for that. We've said it all year. We've had many questions. What you're doing in your athletic world should mirror what you're doing in your school world. So whatever protocols you have in place for sanitation and those kind of things should be in place. We know sometimes based on where you play, the bench area might get kind of tight. Social distance that as best you can, and keep an eye on things following your own protocols. And then for our officials pregame meeting, TASO has their directions for how they handle things with their officials. But what we are saying that we want you to follow throughout the year. One coach from each team go to home plate and meet with the officials prior to the game. Social distance, and then we are requiring face masks. We'll get into more into face mask here in a little bit. Brian will visit about that, but face masks are required. Anytime, just think about it, it makes sense. Anytime you're having interaction with someone else, let's socially distance appropriately and let's wear a face mask for everyone's protection. And then finally, player introductions and pregame ceremonies. Some of you may have an actual introduction process and ceremony at the beginning of the game. That's perfectly fine, but let's have both teams stay on their side. No handshakes, no fist bumps, no running over and handshaking or fist bumping the other coach or the officials, which happens in many of our sports. Let's stay on our side. Let's stay on our baseline. Let's stay on our side of the playing field. And we are discouraging huddles and celebrations. And then we'll do our prayer and national anthem and move through the game, which brings us to personal protective equipment. Brian, visit with us about that.
PPE, the three letters that I doubt most people of us even paid attention to until the beginning of 2020. As we move forward, Will's going to drop down on the screen. I just want to encourage you, as we lost last season and as we've struggled and completed the season so far to date, basketball and winter soccer are finishing up. Wrestling and swim are having a struggle at times finding facilities and, of course, with the close contact. So we are requiring PPE as the seasons begin. So for all assistant coaches and head coaches, when you're on the field to play, whether you're a base coach or outside of the dugout, you need to have your mask on. Manager's scorebook athletic trainers and those players in the dugout all need to have a mask on at all times. And the players also need to have those masks on as well as your coaches when you're entering and leaving the field area. Only players, coaches, and team personnel should be on the play area. Family and friends should be outside the fence. Head coaches, when you're inside giving instruction, if you feel the need to take that mask off and give a little direct instruction, or if you need to line your outfield or whatever from the dugout, of course, you can take that mask down, but we ask that you put it straight back up. Officials, according to what we understand from TASCO, are going to be given that option of wearing or not wearing. There would be a penalty either way. There's not a penalty either way if they so choose to wear or not wear. However, what we're saying is when you're outside of that dugout, the only person, and really even inside the dugout, the only time that a coach or a player could have a mask off is when they're actually participating in the game, or when a coach is giving instruction in the dugout. So players, once they enter the field to play, to bat, or to warm up, or to participate, they can take their mask off depending on what each school allows. So local control for your school only. Your players may wear a mask during pregame and during the game if that's your protocol and that's what your school so desires is best for your students. You can't demand that or require that of your opponent, but you can surely require that of your own players, and there's no penalty if they so choose to wear a mask at all times on the base path, in the batter's box, etc. So we know it's a little restrictive, but what we're trying to do now is get to a championship. We're trying to have a full season, and we know that if we're a little more restrictive now, we can walk on through and have the best shot for getting there. Game balls need to be sanitized as possible. Obviously, you don't want to slick balls, so whichever sanitizer you choose between innings or however you're going to work that, make sure that you've got something to wipe them down with. It's a disinfectant that dries quickly. We've got a couple things here that we've been told by Wilson will work, so if you need that information, we'll post it, and please feel free to reach out to us. Sanitizing of hands, according to the CDC, great thing to do. We agree with that as well. Sanitize their hands when they come in and out, especially after if they're changing headgear or whatever. Make sure your batting helmets, whatever, if they're changing batting helmets or whatever, make sure those are sanitized as well. As we go to the post game, we're going back to the same thing. No handshake lines. Stay on your side of the field. No post game interaction between the teams, and the fans and et cetera should stay outside the fence. Only the teams should be allowed inside. So again, social distance, social distance, social distance. Do the very best we can to keep that going. TASO has shared a video that they're working on completing right now. So once the officials have got their ideas cleaned up and confirmed, we'll share that video with you as well. So you'll have an idea what they're looking at, and they'll have an idea already. Steve talked to them yesterday about what they're looking at. So Steve, tell us a little bit more.
Well, travel, and travel's up to local control. So whether you're taking a bus and everybody's there, 2 buses, parents are taking them, we get that question in the office. Again, that is not something that TAPS is overseeing or giving even recommendation. That needs to be something that's within the protocol of the school. And again, we support each school and administration in doing that. Fans, the requirements for fans, TAPS, the capacity will be limited to the maximum percentage that's set and published by TAPS. Currently, we say 50%. Now, that could go down, that could go up. But again, make sure that you're up to date on what the capacity limits percentages are. Also, local authorities may be more strict in the requirements than TAPS, and that requirement shall be followed. Fans must wear face coverings when entering, leaving the playing area, when not socially distanced at least 6 feet. And if we say 6 feet, probably 10 or 12 feet's better. So make sure there's no misunderstanding between the fan or anybody in the group. Face covering should be worn when they're moving through the crowd, when they're going to the restrooms, when they're going to the concession area. So please, it's easier to say keep your mask on all the time. But again, kind of that's a requirement. That's a courtesy. But make sure that you're overseeing that. And again, game administrators are going to be people who are going to be on the spot this year, continue to be on the spot with these COVID protocols. And so again, make sure that that is communicated to your fan base and to your team going into the season. As we move to the playoffs, we get through a wonderful year. Everything's gone great. We're able to run, drag, crawl, whatever we did to get through the regular season. When we go to the playoffs, the higher seed in by-district and area games will be the host. Make sure that as these games are being arranged, that communication's happening between the 2 schools, and that the local protocols that are going on within the school, how many people how many fans, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. How many fans can we have? Where do they enter? Where's the dressing areas? How do we how do we get in? What's the path? What's the exits? Make sure all this information is communicated back and forth between schools. And as Robert and I say in the office, verbal's great, and let's follow it up in writing so we have a record of it and it's something that we can share with other folks. So as we enter the playoffs, make sure that we understand that. When you get to the regional level, you have the option of neutral site unless you decide on a coin flip. So a neutral site brings in the third party and make sure that that host site's protocols are adhered to. And so we must make sure that we get that information to both and that is communicated. And again, you want to be good stewards. That way, come the years from now when you need to go back and we need to rent facilities from folks, they'll be more willing to do that. And also in COVID, it's important that they feel very comfortable with you coming in and out. So again, make sure that there's communication going on throughout the playoffs. Now, stoppage of play is a tough subject, so I'm going to give it over to Brian to visit about stoppage of play.
As we finish back about the playoff concerns and any games that are going all at the district level, you definitely need to make sure every school knows what their opponents are going to require and allow. Be as generous as possible and be as fair as possible. So we know at the district level, when we go to the regional or the area around and you're traveling, especially if you're traveling over an hour or two to get to a game, if you're that home game or if you're going to a neutral site, make sure you know whether or not you're going to have a shower, whether there's going to be food available, concession stand, those things. This is the year to communicate. Even the little details will become important to somebody. Stoppage of play during the regular season, we have that short-term stoppage where whether it be rain, whether it be whatever, comes and cancels a game on Tuesday, we're telling you, you need to get that game played as soon as possible. So as soon the next day on Wednesday or Thursday, as soon as you can come back up and play that game, or whether you do a doubleheader, we're asking that you don't push those games back to the end of the year. District certification is not moving as far as we know, and you definitely want to be able to get all those games in. The other thing that could happen is a long-term stoppage of play. We have had several schools in the last 2 or 3 days contact the TAPS office. We'll be notifying our districts as we can that at this time they are no longer participating in extracurricular activities based on the COVID metrics at their school or in their area. As a result, those schools may be out for a month, they may be out for 2 months, they may have to cancel their schedule entirely. So COVID related, there's not a penalty if you have to cancel the season. If this is what's driving your numbers down, we just need to know that for the long term. Again, if you're going to be out 10 to 14 days, there's going to be a consideration there of whether you should make those games up, whether you should just let those roll off the season. And that's where we need to talk a little bit further. So if a team cannot play a contest or multiple contests against non-district opponents, district opponents and TAPS opponents take precedence over other schools. So if you have non-district opponents and you're forced to not play for a week, and that's a couple of 3 games, you can reschedule those games, but they should not be made up in place of a TAPS or a district opponent. So honor the association the best you can. If it's a district season and a school cannot play based on COVID reasons, then that becomes a little bit different. We call that a no contest. That game shall not be held against them. They would then be able to move forward. If you can reschedule it, you reschedule. If you cannot, it's a no contest. So it's just the game doesn't get played, but it doesn't count as a forfeit. It doesn't take them out of the playoffs. For a non-COVID reason, basically I decide that I don't want to play today, or my administration decides I can't play today and we can't find a makeup, that game could be considered a forfeit depending on whether you make it up or not. So COVID is a no contest if it's COVID related that you can't play, and then we go forward. As you have questions about that, we've had numerous questions all year long. Reach out to that TAPS office at info@taps.biz or give us a call here at the TAPS office. Robert?
And another thing we remind people, because this has come up throughout the year, you might have a situation at your school where, as a precautionary measure, your administration may have decided, hey, the week before spring break or the week after spring break, for instance, we're going to take an extra week, we're going to go virtual, we're not going to be here, but we're doing it as a protective measure. We're not doing that in response to an outbreak at our school. If you had an outbreak at your school and you were shutting things down for a week, for instance, in your high school, you should not be practicing, you should not be participating in any games during that time in that situation, because that is specifically in response to a COVID outbreak or situation at your school. However, we had people take breaks over Thanksgiving and Christmas, and we anticipate they may do that throughout the rest of the winter and spring as a preventative measure to take that opportunity to step back just a little bit, get a handle on things, communicate that very carefully, and specifically to what your situation is, and then proceed according to your protocols.
I think a good rule of thumb there, Robert, would be to give us a call at the TAPS office and tell us what you're thinking about doing, and making sure that we all craft the words and the verbiage so that it doesn't penalize teams or whatever if that's not the intent. So again, if you have an outbreak at your school and that is requiring you to shut down, no games, no practice. If it is precautionary, you don't have an outbreak, but you know what, we can take an extra 2 or 3 days, or we could take a Friday and a Monday off, and try to gain ourselves some social distancing, that would be allowed. As you go on forward, we are allowing no contest in the district season, but once you get to the playoffs, it becomes a forfeit. So if you cannot play during the playoff season, it becomes a final a forfeit, whether that's in the playoffs or in the Final Four. And we have had that happen. We had that happen a little bit in volleyball, where teams were either not able to enter or they were not able to advance. In fact, in one set of football, on one line of football, one team got 2 forfeitures in a row to advance on because of the COVID situation. So COVID may require that. So as we finish, it's a COVID year. We're ecstatic to be here talking softball. We really enjoyed talking baseball and softball both today. We know we're going to get to the end. We don't know what it's going to look like when we get there. We're still looking at facilities. We're still looking at format for the Final Four. But we know that if we all do our part, if you pull your weight, we pull our weight, together, we can get to the end. So we thank you for joining us here on this webinar for softball. Again, taps.biz, www.taps.biz. Click on athletics, click on softball. That'll get you to all things softball for us. The phone number, though, it's a Central Texas number. We're at the Texas Motor Speedway with a number of 254-947-9268. And info, I-N-F-O, at taps.biz. If you have questions or concerns, please make sure you reach out to us. John finishes up here on the webinar, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Will, for helping us out in the office today. Folks, that's it for us. This recording will be available later this afternoon. You're going to get an email to the same address that you used to register for this webinar. And if you can't, if you needed earlier than that or anything else, you can find it on our YouTube page. That's youtube.com/tapsbiz. Again, that'll be available this afternoon, and you will get an email. Thank you, folks, and enjoy the rest of your day.